This is week 11 of college baseball rankings. Let's jump into it. The top two teams have really, seems like, separated themselves from the rest of the field, with a lot of the other top 10 really being able to be anywhere in that rankings. But LSU and Wake Forest are by far the two best teams, it looks like, at this point. South Carolina, kind of on the fringe, but had a bad week last week. So, Wake Forest, LSU, I think we stick with the same 1-2 as previous weeks and what it's been like for pretty much the entire year, with LSU at 1 and then Wake Forest after 2. And then after that point, can go in an interesting direction.
Yeah, I think those teams are pretty interchangeable at the top with LSU and Wake Forest, but LSU just hasn't slipped up to this point, so it's hard to jump Wake at any point. I think if LSU dropped one of those games against Bama and went 2-2 on the week, you could have justified moving Wake Forest ahead of them there. But clearly the two best teams up to this point, and for me, the top six in my rankings stayed the same. Even though South Carolina had a bad week, I still think they're one of the best teams in the country. I just left them in that 3 spot there.
Yeah, I also had the same top 6 now that I'm looking at it. And especially with South Carolina, what they did to Florida the previous week, it just doesn't seem like Florida deserves to jump over them, even though they had a good bounce back week and got back on track with the sweep versus Missouri. South Carolina just has a better record and seems like obviously having that head to head over Florida is definitely something to note there. But yeah, we have 3 South Carolina, Florida 4, Vandy 5, Arkansas 6, and then after that, different teams can jump in, because at 7 last week we did have Coastal Carolina, but they went 2-2, lost their midweek at what was number 2 and still is number 2 Wake Forest, and then went to Louisiana and won the series there. So ending the week 2-2, which isn't terrible. Kind of expected 2-2 week after going against Wake Forest midweek, but would have liked to see that game be a little bit more competitive, since it was 11-1 through 7 innings where it was ended short because of that. So Coastal Carolina kind of got really handled there, and showed that there is a bit of a gap, and maybe Coastal should be like on the outside of the top 10, or just like a little bit further down in the rankings. So for 7, me personally had Stanford jumping up only 1 spot. They went 3-1. Played all Pac-12 teams this week, with Cal midweek, and then beating UCLA on the weekend. So pretty solid week against decent competition.
Yeah, I also had Stanford up in this 7 spot. Good series win against UCLA. It was a very competitive series. I think we both still think UCLA is a decent team, even though they're outside the top 25. They've just dealt with a lot of injuries this season, but still a quality series win. And Coastal, like you mentioned, 2-2 on the week. That midweek was just an ugly one, losing 11-1. I don't think it's surprising that they gave up 11 runs, but it is surprising that they only mustered 1 run. Especially with this Coastal team, their strength is their offense. So would have expected them to put up more runs there, and I dropped them to the 9 spot for me and had Duke rising up into the 8 spot after that series win over Virginia. That team is scorching hot now and picking up series wins against ranked teams.
Yep, we had Duke at 16 last week. I also had them jumping into the top 10. I had them 1 spot lower, with Coastal and Duke just being switched there. Had Coastal at 8 and Duke at 9. But I think there is definitely merit for Duke jumping them. They've just been, like you said, scorching hot. Just another impressive week where they just continue to beat some of the better teams in the conference and in the country. So, yeah, they had a really tough schedule in front of them, and Duke just continues to play it out really well. This week they went to Virginia and won the series there, so just insanely hot, and Virginia was just outside the top 10 this past week. So keep beating those really high level ACC teams, and definitely deserves to be a top 10 team, all things considered, now with their record and just being able to prove it week in, week out. So yeah, I think Duke at 8 is fine, and then Coastal 9 works for me. All right, and then at 10, last week, 9 through 14, had relatively bad weeks. But yeah, starting at 9, we had Campbell. They went 0-2. They faced Duke and then went to Elon, lost both those games. Bad week, and they didn't play a weekend series. So just tough, all things considered. They weren't able to get any wins, and there wasn't like bad competition for them to face to kind of rack that up. Both teams are pretty decent, so unfortunate to only play 2 games and play two relatively tough teams there, but definitely deserves to drop down a little bit just because they haven't faced a lot of good teams, and their record was primarily because they just were outclassing a lot of their opponents. After that, Boston College was at 10. They went 2-2. They won their midweek, but then lost to Clemson on the weekend. So they've just been inconsistent recently. So yeah, I think they probably deserve to drop a bit. And taking their place at number 10 for me was West Virginia. We had them at 18. I had them jumping all the way up to that 10 spot just because they have consistently proven that they're what looks to be like the front runner in the Big 12, and they look pretty dangerous. Yeah, they just got a sweep over Baylor, who isn't the best team, probably one of the worst teams in the Big 12. But, they're consistently getting those wins, and they were 4-0 over the past week and only have 11 losses so far.
Yeah, this was a move that I also made, and I was a bit worried that you would leave them down at 16 or 17 there.
I'm with West Virginia right now. I like it.
I thought we might have a big discrepancy, but yes, I am also on the West Virginia train right now. They're playing extremely well and look like potentially the class of the Big 12, and kind of a down year for the conference. Just nobody really taking a hold of things, or usually you expect one or two of those teams in the top 10 potentially, and yeah, it's just been a rough year for that conference, especially RPI wise as well. But West Virginia certainly putting them in position to host, potentially even get a national seed the way they're playing right now. And yeah, I had them in this 10 spot as well.
Yeah, with like the likes of Texas, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, those teams just kind of being inconsistent with, usually we see them right at the top of the rankings. It's somewhat surprising to see a team like West Virginia be the team to step up here, especially after just like all over the place. We're used to seeing those other Texas teams and Oklahoma even, making the College World Series, almost winning it last year, and they're definitely not that team this year, but West Virginia looks to be stepping up in a conference that is a bit turned on its head this year. So after that, I had another big jump, which was Tennessee at 11. They were 15 last week. They went 4-0 and swept Mississippi State on the weekend. And just a lot of these teams around this spot, like I mentioned, didn't have the best weeks. We have Virginia going 3-2, but they did lose their weekend series, and that's their third straight. Texas Tech right after at 12, who lost their weekend series, and those were the only games they played against Kansas State, who's a decent opponent, but still, if they want to kind of prove that they're one of the better teams there, got to handle their business. We got East Carolina after that at 13, also a rough week, going 2-2, losing to NC State midweek, and then winning the series versus Tulane. But Tulane is a bad team this year, so kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. Would have loved to see a 3-1 week there. And then Kentucky probably having the worst week out of anybody in the rankings, just continues to not show that why they should be a top SEC team, as they just continue to lose weekend series. Just another terrible week, 0-4. And yeah, it's their fourth straight weekend series loss, I believe. So yeah, it's just been a rough stretch, and it won't get any easier with the competition they will be facing over the next few weeks. So I just don't see a way that Kentucky is able to rise quickly unless they completely prove people wrong.
Yeah, yep. Kentucky definitely a team that has to turn it around in these last couple weeks of conference play, and hopefully play well in the conference tournament as well if they're trying to get back into this high level consideration. But yeah, a lot of tough weeks in this stretch here. This 11 spot is also a spot I was considering for Tennessee. I had them just a few spots lower. I decided to have Campbell in this 11 spot. I didn't want to drop them super far. 0-2 on the week, but it was the good teams, and it's just tough when you only play 2 games in a week. Tough to really drop them a ton. So I had Campbell in this 11 spot, and then I also wanted to keep Boston College ahead of Tennessee, so I had Boston College in the 12, followed up by Tennessee at 13.
Okay.
Boston College with not a terrible week, 2-2. Series lost to Clemson. Clemson, a team that is probably on the fringe of our top 25 now, a team that's in consideration, similar to Duke, kind of turning it up. halfway into this ACC play. Not quite on that level, but playing well late. And yeah, that's what I had for this 11 through 13 section.
Yep, I had the same teams, just in a little different order. Had Campbell in front of Boston College, put them right after Tennessee. So you had Tennessee at 13, I had them at 11, and then the other teams are just one after another. Yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to kind of punish some of the teams a little bit more. Maybe not Campbell, but I think Tennessee is looking better than Boston College is right now. They've just been pretty inconsistent, and Tennessee is kind of finally showing what they can be if they really put it all together. And they're slowly beating the teams that they should beat now, and looking a little bit better.
Yeah, I'd be fine with going Tennessee, Campbell, Boston College here.
Okay, that works with me. I mean, I could see Campbell above Tennessee as well. But yeah, I think that's more of a coin flip for me. But I think Tennessee proved that they're more, or at least they deserve to be a higher spot than Boston College this week. But Campbell, I don't know, could be a fringe. But especially because Tennessee and Boston College have pretty similar records now, and that was kind of the one thing holding Tennessee back for a while, is just because they had a lot of losses.
Yeah, I'd be fine. Let's go with Tennessee in the 11.
Cool, sounds good. And then after Boston College at 13, I decided to stick UConn in that 14 spot. They were 3-0 on the week, beating Rhode Island and Villanova. So not impressive wins, but they did the job. They've been consistently winning. And yeah, this is a week where they can capitalize on some losses in the midfield of the top 25 to be able to jump up a few spots.
Yeah, I had UConn in my 15 spot here. I left East Carolina in the 14. Just an average week from them, 2-2.
Yep.
Series win over Tulane. But yeah, I thought about bringing UConn up a little higher, but yeah, just didn't play any good competition that week. So 3-0,
Yeah.
more so taking care of business, and didn't want to punish ECU a ton because it wasn't that terrible of a week.
True. I think that kind of makes sense. The only reason why I wanted to punish East Carolina a little bit more is just because they had a bad week last week, and this wasn't like the best rebound. So I wanted to, drop them a little bit more. But I did have East Carolina right after UConn, so 14-15 still. Just wanted kind of to give UConn a little bit more there to separate them. But yeah.
I think even with ECU stumbling recently, I think I still have more faith in them than UConn at this point. That's why I left them over there.
Yeah, I'm good with that. That's fine. We'll see what they prove next week, but that works with me. And at 16 for me is where I had Virginia dropping to, even though this is their third straight weekend series loss. So they have been struggling in conference. They still only have 11 losses overall, so their record still looks pretty good, all things considered. So yeah, I just felt like this was a good place to drop them, kind of right after that East Carolina Boston College tier.
Yeah, I had Virginia in my 17 spot. 16 is where I brought up Oregon after a 4-1 week, 2 wins over Gonzaga in the midweek, and then a series win over Arizona State, who we had in the 20 spot last week. I thought it was a solid week from them, beating the Arizona State, who was atop of the Pac-12 standings heading into the week. Thought it was a good week. I think Oregon's trending in the right direction with 3 straight series wins in the conference, one of them being over Stanford and one of them being over Arizona State. So had them jumping up here and Virginia following it up.
Yeah, they definitely look hot recently. I just couldn't put them above Oregon State at the time being, just because Oregon State did take the weekend series against them earlier this year. So I had Oregon State and Oregon right after Virginia at 17 and 18. But yeah, still like around the same teams. I just thought Oregon State kind of deserved to stay above them, just because they have like the exact same record right now at 30 and 13, and they have that head-to-head win over Oregon, even though other losses to top Pac-12 teams just felt the head-to-head was a little bit more important, and things will change in the long run probably, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think my reasoning for not keeping them ahead was them just losing that series to Arizona State. So they do have the head-to-head, but I think you can kind of go around the circle there and pick and choose which you want to point out
Right.
there. I think it was more so of a feeler pick of liking the quality series wins from Oregon recently.
Yeah. Where'd you have Oregon State at?
It was in the 19 spot
Okay.
with
Yeah.
with Miami at 18.
Okay, I had Miami at 19, so we have the same four teams there, just a matter of order. I just think if, like, I don't know, it's tough to have a team with very similar records and kind of similar wins against quality opponents, like Oregon State and Oregon, to be near each other and not have the team that won the series be below. It's kind of like a slap in the face uh, with regards to that. But yeah, I think Virginia and Miami also around that area. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough to figure out these specifics. All right, so I can concede on the Oregon State Oregon consideration, but at this point, yeah, I think maybe Miami. They've been looking relatively consistent recently and finally getting road wins. So I think maybe we consider jumping Oregon State if we're not doing that head-to-head consideration, like I mentioned, just because they have looked like a decent road team now in Miami. So yeah, they're finally showing that they can put it together there as well as at home.
Yeah, yeah, I like Miami. In between them there, I mean, our problem with Miami was, like you said, playing on the road and how they had played against high level competition. But I thought this series win over Louisville is them starting to head in the right direction that way and turning into on the getting into the higher end of the ACC and looking like a potential host if they keep playing well.
Yeah, they faced most of the toughest competition in the ACC, and to be at the record they are, sure, it's probably the worst record in the top 25, but the level of competition that they faced pretty consistently is one of the best in the nation so far. So I think they deserve to be there. So we'll have Oregon 17, Miami 18, and then Oregon State 19. After Oregon State at 19 is where I had Texas Tech landing after going 1-2 the past week. And yeah, look, they have a lot of losses and they haven't faced the toughest competition out of the teams in the top 25, but they still have some pretty decent wins. But 30-15 is not the best record, especially since they're not in one of the at least top two conferences in the ACC and the SEC. But yeah, I couldn't have them fall too far back considering K-State on the road is still a pretty tough competition.
Yep, I also had Texas Tech here in this spot. Yep, had to punish them a bit for 1-2 week, but it was on the road, and Kansas State's actually been a pretty solid team in the Big 12 this season, so this is also where I had them landing.
Yeah, and then following that 21 was Oklahoma State. They stayed in the same spot, unfortunately. They only had 2 games at Michigan, won them both, so it was a good week, but going back to head, like I was going off of earlier, Texas Tech did beat Oklahoma State, so thought it should stay that way, that Texas Tech stay in front of them for now. We'll see in the coming days what happens, but for now, that's what I thought.
Yep, that was my thought process as well. Also had Oklahoma State following them up, and then in the 22 spot is where I had Louisville dropping after that series loss to Miami.
Okay, yeah, I think you can drop them anywhere from like you said, 22 to potentially 25. Look, they faced Kentucky midweek, won there with kind of puts Kentucky in their terrible hole there, and then lost the series against Miami, which was I guess an okay week, but it is 3 straight weekend series losses. So yeah, it's not great, and would have probably liked to see 2-2. It would have been fine if they lost midweek and won their weekend series. Probably would have been a little better. Wouldn't have dropped as far for me. Might be around this 22 area, but I thought they just keep losing the more important games on the weekend, and that's why I dropped them a little farther to 24, and I left Arizona State only dropping a few spots. But yeah, I thought Louisville might deserve to drop a bit more, but we can just go through the teams that we have left and potentially the teams that we brought in. But the teams around there for me had Arizona State, actually, like I mentioned, at 22. They went 2-3. faced Fullerton midweek, went 1-1 against them, and then went to Oregon and lost the series there, which isn't a great week, so should drop definitely, but they only faced a good competition, so definitely could have been worse with the teams they faced. And yeah, I think the offense showed up for the most part. It was just kind of the pitching staff, which has been the story of the whole season for them. But yeah, I didn't think they should drop too far just because they have won decent series recently, like the series win over Oregon State a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I had ASU dropping to my 25 spot, but I think they could be anywhere in this range here. Like you said, it wasn't a bad week, and Louisville has lost 3 weekends in a row, which is worrisome. But I liked Louisville's 2-2 week more with a midweek win over Kentucky rather than ASU's split against Fullerton. And since Louisville was ranked higher than them previously, I liked keeping them ahead there. But I mean, like you mentioned, the three series losses in a row is definitely worrisome as well. So I think you can move these teams around here. I had DBU staying in at my 23 spot, and then with Kentucky dropping out with 4 straight series losses, I brought in one new team, and that was Maryland for me, a team that we've continually mentioned outside of our top 25. Had a brutal start to the season, but since then have won a bunch of Big Ten series in a row, including series win over ranked Iowa at the time, and now Indiana, who was a team that was potentially 26 in our last rankings there, right, knocking on the door. So a 4-0 week with a sweep over Indiana has me thinking Maryland's back a little bit and able to slide into the bottom of these rankings.
Yeah, so we both had Kentucky dropping out. I had DBU as well, jumping up to 23, so rising a little bit. But the team that I brought in, I think Maryland is definitely worthy of jumping into the top 25. They're just like we mentioned, there's only one team dropping out. There really wasn't much room to bring many teams in. So the team that I decided that deserved it was Northeastern. With just looking at their record alone, 35-7. Sure, they're in a not premier conference, but they just continue to prove it and sweep teams and just win. And that it's hard to do to get that many wins without losing games, even if it's against lesser teams than other conferences. Only have 7 losses so far. They just continue to prove it, and the record speaks for itself. And they swept Indiana State earlier in the year. So, they have proved it a little bit against teams that are close to being ranked. I think that they have shown that they have some quality against better competition as well. They just really haven't had the opportunity to play top teams for the most part.
Yeah, Northeastern definitely a team I was considering as well. I just have a little more faith in Maryland as a team. But, I mean, like you mentioned, Northeastern definitely has taken care of their schedule as much as possible, and it's impressive to rack up that many wins even in a weaker conference.
Yeah, I had Northeastern in that 25 spot. Where'd you have Maryland going?
24 ahead of ASU, but, I mean, I'm fine with moving up ASU higher.
I think we can fill out the rest of the top 25 and just leave the 25 spot open for Northeastern or Maryland. Depending on how we go, but we can just finish out the top 25 before that. All right, so I have ASU 22, DBU 23, and Louisville 24, and you have kind of the flip-flop of that, going Louisville up top and then ASU at 24, with DBU staying in that same spot. So maybe we split the gap and put DBU ahead of both of them.
Yeah, I'd be fine with doing that.
Yeah, considering they had a pretty good week. I mean, they lost their midweek at TCU, but swept Rice, so not terrible winning record, unlike the other teams. So yeah, good week. And then following that up, ASU and Louisville. I just think ASU has been a little bit more consistent, even though they lost the weekend series last week. It was a tough competition, ranked team, on the road. So with that, I think, Louisville was at home versus Miami, so it's a little bit more leeway, especially with what we had. They did beat Kentucky midweek, who was 14, but now we don't have them ranked, so that's kind of not like a ranked win anymore. And yeah, Fullerton is kind of in that similar area of just outside the top 25 for me now. They've just consistently been good and probably the best team in their conference throughout the year so far. So they're kind of similar with that regard with Kentucky, just around the edge of the top 25. And so I think those kind of neutralize each other, and just the consistency of Arizona State was a little bit more that took me over the edge of Louisville.
Yeah, I think I'm fine with doing Arizona State and then Louisville. I think these teams will kind of sort themselves out. Arizona State plays Stanford this weekend. Louisville plays Clemson, so both playing tough competition. A little bit of a tougher week for ASU, obviously, but I think they'll sort themselves out with the way they play this weekend.
Yep, that sounds good to me. And then that pesky 25 spot, who does it go to, Northeastern or Maryland? I just think Maryland has more of an opportunity to jump into the top 25 week in, week out, while Northeastern is just consistently right on the outside. They've been on the outside for, it seems like, the past like 6-7 weeks. We just keep mentioning their name in passing. Like, yeah, they can make it eventually if they just keep proving it, and they're not losing games, but there just doesn't seem like ever to be a spot open. Teams keep jumping them who keep getting hot, like Duke and West Virginia and teams like that. So I think, I don't know, it feels like Northeastern finally should deserve to be in the top 25 at some point, especially with a team like Maryland who has struggled at some points this year.
Yeah, no, I'm fine with that. Like you mentioned, Maryland is a team that's going to have more opportunities to prove it throughout the rest of the year. We'll play better competition. Not the greatest in the Big Ten, but better than Northeastern will face. So
yeah, I think they're what. If we have them at like 26, look, if there's a spot that opens up next week, they'll probably be able to jump in. But yeah, we can talk through a few of the teams right on the outside. Besides Maryland now, we got Florida Gulf Coast, who got knocked out a few weeks ago. They went 4-0, had a good week against bad teams. So close to being ranked. They just need spots to open up. Unfortunately, Indiana, who was the 26 team, it seemed like last week, went 1-3 and got swept by Maryland. So really tough after being so close to being ranked, but they still have a chance to get back in there within a few weeks. And then similarly in the state, Indiana State 2-1 against Evansville, which is a good week. Evansville seems like they're a decent team at least. So yeah, they're close to being ranked. Just needed Northeastern to get in there ahead of them just because of that head-to-head matchup.
Yeah, a couple more teams I had on the outside. Texas, UTSA, Clemson as well as team we mentioned earlier. Also have Cal State Fullerton there, team knocking on the door. One other is UCLA, who just recently dropped out. Didn't have a good week. I mean, they lost the series to Stanford, but it was a competitive weekend, and with how injured they are, I do think it's possible that they get cracking on the door in a couple weeks here. So just a team I have noted.
Yeah, they can get hot, and it seems like their pitching staff is always something to rely on, which is definitely a positive down the stretch because offenses can always stall here and there, but pitching staffs you can really rely on. So if UCLA can get a little bit more healthy, they can probably make a pretty decent run in the next few weeks, but we'll have to see there. So those were all the teams that I also had written down, so we can jump into the end of the top 25 rundown. Week 11 of the top 25 college baseball rankings goes as follows. Northeastern at 25, then Louisville, Arizona State, DBU, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech at 20, Oregon State, Miami, Oregon, Virginia, UConn at 15, East Carolina, Boston College, Campbell, Tennessee, West Virginia at 10, Coastal Carolina 9, Duke 8, Stanford 7, Arkansas 6, Vanderbilt 5, Florida 4, South Carolina 3, Wake Forest 2, and LSU still in that number 1 spot.